Hello everyone, this is Ms. Smith, and the purpose of this video is to talk about preparing correspondence. Now, there's a whole chapter in our textbook that talks about preparing correspondence, and it's divided into talking about letters and memos. For this video, we will only talk about letters, and the information that you see cited in this PowerPoint comes from our textbook, and of course that's Successful Writing at Work, the Concise 4th edition by Philip C. Collen. And so the chapter starts off talking about letters in the age of the internet. Now, before we go any further, I will say this, and I say this all the time in face-to-face classes, so I'll say this also in an online class. Learning about proper letter structure is not fun. It's not necessarily interesting unless you just decide to be interested in it. And the reason I say that is because we are very used to, most of us are very used to an age of the internet where everything happens faster than typical letter writing and putting it in the post office and having it mailed. Things happen faster nowadays and we communicate at a faster pace. And with letter writing, there are some conventions and some norms and some expectations that your reader will have that you want to make sure that you follow. Okay? I come from a day and time where we wrote letters mainly, right? The internet was not as prevalent as it is today. But there still is a place and a reason and a purpose for writing letters. So it's important that you know the norms, the expectations, the formats for writing a letter, even though it's not necessarily interesting stuff to talk about, okay? And so we're going to cover all of that because I want you to be prepared, and I don't want you to lose credibility because you're missing pieces or parts of a letter that you as a professional communicator should know to include. Okay, so just bear with me as we go through all of this information. Like I said, it's not going to be especially exciting, but it's going to be necessary. It's kind of like eating your vegetables, right? It may not be fun, but it's going to be good for you. Okay, and so there is, like I said a moment ago, still a place for letters in the workplace. Okay, and so the book talks about several different things, but I just want to highlight a few things throughout this PowerPoint. One of the things is that letters represent your company's public image and your competence. Okay, the book talks about that. Now, typically in the workplace, if you are ever writing something on a letter, that letter will more than likely have a letterhead. And it's something like a design element at the top of the page, and it usually contains the company's brand, their logo, maybe their slogan or tagline, and usually their contact information, the street address or P.O. box address, the website, the email address or something, phone numbers. And so usually that contact information and all that design element, brand, logo, and everything is usually at the top of the page of the letter, already printed on it. And that's the letterhead. Okay, and so whenever you as an employee write a letter, you send it out on the company's letterhead, you are promoting the company's public image. And so if the content of your letter is not professional, or it's not of quality, or does something to diminish your credibility, your company's credibility will go down as well. Okay, so it's important to realize that you have to make sure that you're definitely being professional, because a letter, when you communicate with a letter, you are representing your company's public image. Letters tend to be far more formal in tone and structure, more than any type of business communication. When something is put in a letter form, it is usually something that's a little bit more important than something that can just be sent through a quick email. Okay, letters often constitute an official legal record of an agreement. And so if you get a job offer, chances are you will get a letter in the mail, and you'll have to sign that letter as your intent to join that company, and to agree upon the salary that you've been offered. And that would pretty much constitute some type of an official legal document, or official document at the very least, of an agreement for you to join that company. Okay. Letters are the official and expected medium through which important documents are sent to readers in most cases. Of course, things are sent via email, and important documents can be sent via email. But letters are typically the primary way, or the preferred way, for that important communication to happen. Okay. And so again, letters, even in the age of the internet, represent your company's public image and your competence as a communicator. Tend to be far more formal in tone and structure than any type of business communication. They can constitute an official legal record of an agreement, and they are the official and expected medium through which important documents are sent to readers in most cases. Okay, and so there is still a place for letters even in the age of the internet. And so there are various types of letter formats, and understanding this is important. Now, in our class, we're going to write letters, of course, right? And so typically, I will ask you to use full block format for your letter writing. Okay, full block format is discussed more on page 99, and it's the simplest form. It's the one that I use all the time myself because it makes my life easier. In full block format, everything is aligned to the left margin. Simple, right? You don't have to worry about which parts need to be moved over. Everything in that letter is aligned to the left margin, and it just makes our lives easier. Okay, and so like I said, more times than not, I will ask you to use full block format for your letter writing in this class. With modified block format, also discussed on page 99, there are certain parts of the letter that is not aligned to the left margin. It's aligned center the page. Okay, and those parts could include your dateline, your complimentary close, and your signature at the bottom of your letter. Okay, and so in modified block, the only difference is that certain sections of the letter would not be aligned to the left margin. It would be aligned center or more to the right side of the page. And then there's semi-block format, which is a lot like modified block format, but it's indented. The paragraphs are indented. Okay, I will almost never ask you to use the semi-block format. And again, we will use full block format for most of the letter writing in this class. Now, it's easy to get confused, especially when you get into writing your letters, right? Because we've already talked about ABC format, now we're talking about another format. So keep in mind that when we talk about ABC format, abstract body conclusion, ABC format is a format that helps you structure your communication. When you think ABC format, I want you to think structure. Okay, ABC format, structure. The purpose of it is to help you structure your communication. When we talk about letter formats, we're referring to the way in which you print a letter, in which the letter appears on the page, the actual letter. Okay, so it's two different types of formats, and try not to get them confused because we're going to be applying both types of formats in one letter. Parts of a letter. Okay, and so this is really important because your credibility can rise or fall if your letter is correct or if it's incorrect. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're maintaining your credibility by putting in all of the pieces and parts that you need to put in to have a complete letter. And so these are the parts of the letter, and the book does a really good job of outlining all of these pieces and parts. So we have the heading, the date line, the inside address, the salutation, the body of the letter, the complimentary close, the signature, the enclosure line, and copy notation. Okay, a lot of pieces and parts, right? And so let's talk about each one of them really quickly. Again, your book goes over this in a little bit more detail, but I'm just going to hit some of the highlights here. The heading. So your letter begins with a heading of some sort. If you're using a letter that has a company letterhead on the top that I was just telling you about, then you don't need to do anything. That company letterhead is the heading. Okay, so if you're ever writing something and it's on company stationery, company letterhead, where you have the company's logo and contact information and all of that emblazoned on the top of the letter, um, then that's the letterhead. So there's no heading that you would actually have to do. However, if you are writing your own letter, okay, and it's not coming from a company, it's coming from you, your heading should include your full address. Okay, and so for example, if I live at 123 Main Street in Orangeburg, South Carolina, okay, 29118, that's the address I want to put at the top of my letter. Okay, 123 Main Street, Orangeburg, South Carolina, 29118. Okay, you do not want to include your name, your phone number, your email address, or any other information, contact information in that heading. Your heading should only contain your full address. That's it. And you're only putting a heading on a letter if you do not have company letterhead. Okay, and so for the purposes of our assignments this semester, I may not give you a company letterhead to use for your assignments, and so you can just do a full address, and you can create the address. You don't have to use your exact physical address. You can create one if you want. Just make sure that whatever you create is decent and is tactful, right? You don't want to create anything that is questionable for the purposes of your college level English class. So make sure that you're using good judgment with that. So then we have dateline. The dateline is simply the date in which you are writing the letter. And so let's say the date is December 31st, 2015. Let's just say, for example, you want to write out the word December, right? You want to put the number in there, of course, 31st, 31, a comma, and then you want to put the full year. You never want to have your date line in any abbreviated fashion. For example, 12/31/15. Okay, you want to say December 31st, comma 2015. December 3/1, right? Comma 2015. So you want to write that full date out, and that would be the date line. The inside address is the recipient's address. So whomever you're writing your letter to, you want to put that individual's address there. Okay, and so you want to include a name if you have a name, and you want to make sure that you include their title if you know their title, and include a full address there. Okay, so it's name, title, of course the name of the company, and then the full address for the inside address. Okay, so the inside address is the recipient's address. A lot of times students get the heading and the inside address confused. Okay, so just try to make a note to yourself. The heading begins your letter, and that is your full address. Okay, then you have your date line, and then the inside address is the address of the person that you're writing to. And so you want to put their name, their title, their company's name, and then their address. And if you don't have that information readily available, you could always go online to the company to see if you can find that information, like the company's address, where you can send the letter. Sometimes if it is appropriate, you can place a phone call to ask for that information. But you want to make sure that that inside address is as complete as possible. Another thing, and the book talks about this, you do not want to assume that you know the gender of the person you are writing to. Okay? Nowadays, women can have names that sound masculine, and sometimes a man will have a name that may sound feminine. Okay? And the book talks about this a little bit. So a man can be named Kelly, right? There are guys named Kelly. There are guys named Stacy. There are guys named Lynn. And so you want to make sure that if you do not know for sure if your recipient is male or female, that you just state their name and that you do not put a courtesy title with it. Okay, the book talks about courtesy titles. It's always good to use it if you know for sure if the person is male or female. But if you don't know, err on the side of caution and do not put Miss or Mr. down as a courtesy title. Okay. Now the salutation is your greeting. That's where you would say, "Dear so and so," right? To whoever you're writing to. Again, you don't want to put "Dear Miss Kelly Jones," because you may not know if Kelly is male or female. Okay. Now, if you do know, of course, you can put "Dear Miss Kelly Jones" or "Mr. Kelly Jones," but you want to make sure that you know. So if you don't know for sure, you just want to put the person's name, "Dear Kelly Jones." And you want to make sure that you keep that really simple. Dear, the person's name, or the person's title is fine. Now, you should not say "to whom it may concern," because nowadays that is a little formal sounding, a little too formal sounding, and you want it to seem as if you're writing to someone in particular. You want the recipient to feel as if you're writing to him or her, not that you're just writing to anyone who happens to get the letter. And so you want to make sure you do your research on your end to try to find a name so that you can address the letter to someone, or at least to the right department. Now, the body of the letter, this is where you apply ABC format or inverted pyramid model, just depending on the type of letter that you're writing. And so with ABC format, of course, that's abstract, body, conclusion. That's where you begin with a generalized opening, a professional opening. You save your details for the body of the communication. And then at the conclusion, you want to wrap up. And ideally, you are wrapping up with some form of a goodwill closing, to keep the door of communication open between you and your recipient. Okay? With the inverted pyramid model, remember we talked about that as well, where you start from most important details, and that tends to be a lot of times that 5 W's information: who, what, where, when, why, and sometimes how. And then you want to work down to the information that's important, the information that is less important, and then the information that's least important. So remember, with that inverted pyramid model, you're starting with the most important details first, and you're working your way down in your communication to the least important details. And you're doing this just in case your reader stops reading halfway, just in case you lose their attention halfway, if they're interrupted, right? If they're busy, if they're impatient to get to important information. Remember what we talked about with their audience needs, right? And those types of things, and how they're going to have a lot going on a lot of times when they're reading your correspondence. Then you want to make sure that you get the important information in as quick as possible, and that inverted pyramid model helps you do that. Okay, and so ABC format or inverted pyramid model, depending on the type of letter you're writing, that goes in the body of the letter. Now, for the letters that you'll be writing in my class, I will typically ask you to use ABC format, and I will typically ask you to make sure you have 3 paragraphs. Okay, and a clear abstract, a clear body, and a clear conclusion, so that I can see you applying that model in each of those paragraphs. So make sure that you try to have 3 paragraphs in that ABC format. Complimentary close. That's going to be your sincerely, comma, or your best regards, comma, thank you is a good complimentary close. Of course, with your complimentary close, you never want to say something that is personal, or too informal in a letter that is meant to be professional in nature. Okay, so you never want to say yours truly. And some books will say yours truly is fine. I don't think yours truly is fine. You don't want to say, of course, you don't want to say love. You don't want to say anything that would not be professional. And so the safest bets are sincerely, or best regards, or thank you. Okay, and so that would be your complimentary close. Now, after the complimentary close, you want to return 4 times, and then you want to type your name. All right, your full name, or your first and last name is usually fine. And that space, those 4 spaces in between there, would be your signature area. Now, traditionally, when a letter was typed, that space was left so that the letter writer could sign it, right? Space for the letter writer to sign his or her name to the letter before it was sent out. Nowadays, in the age of internet, we don't typically sign letters if we are sending them via email, okay, or some electronic form. But It is still, like I said before, letters are still used in the workplace. Hard copy letters are still used in the workplace. So it is a good idea to still leave that space so that you have room to sign it. So if you're ever writing a letter that you will print out, that you will mail out, you want to leave that space so that you can sign it. I want you, even if you're not mailing it and not printing it out, I want you to make sure that you leave that space there because that is standard letter practice. Okay, so after your complimentary close, your sincerely or your thank you or your best regards, whatever you use, you want to put a comma and then you want to return 4 times and then you want to type your name. And that space, that four line space that you've left in the middle there, that is ideally where your signature would go. Okay? Now you don't have to worry about getting your signature in that space. You can leave it blank, but I want that space to be there. Now the last two things we have are the enclosure line and the copy notation. Okay, so with the enclosure line, if you are enclosing something else with that letter, you can note it there. So for example, let's say when we're writing the jobs packet and you are writing your cover letter, you may put ENC colon for enclosure resume. Let's say you are saying that my resume is also in this packet with this cover letter. So whatever other documents that you have going along with your letter, you would want to note that with the enclosure line, and that is near the end of the letter. And the copy notation. And that is something like the enclosure line that's reminiscent of email. Okay, so email kind of gleaned some of its features from the standard letter. And so with copy notation, it's kind of like when you open up an email and you see the CC colon, right, where you can copy someone else on the email. It's the same type of concept. And so if you're writing a letter and you want the recipient to be aware that you are sending that same letter, that same correspondence to other people, then you would just do that as you would in an email. You would put CC colon and then you would state the names of the people that this same letter is also going to. Okay? Typically in our class, with few exceptions, you probably won't need to use copy notation, and you may not actually need to use the enclosure line either. Okay, so what is common for a standard letter is for you to have your heading, your date line, your inside address, your salutation, the body of the letter, your complimentary close, and your signature. Those things are standard. And then, if the need arises, you would have an enclosure line and a copy notation. So let's talk about the appearance of your letter. The look of your document can either enhance or diminish your credibility as a communicator. Therefore, the informed writer should be mindful of the following. And the book talks about this in a lot more detail, but like I said, I just wanted to highlight a few things in this video. So printer quality. And so, of course, if you print something, you want to take a good look at it because if it looks like it's fading or your toner is low, you never want to send that out as a professional document. You want to change the toner cartridge first, right? So that you have a letter that is printed and that is clear and easy to read. So you want to check printer quality. You want to be sure that you're using appropriate fonts. So we don't talk about fonts in great detail in the class. The book does cover it and does a good job of covering it. But essentially, you want to make sure that the type, your font is the look of your type on the page. And so you want to make sure that you're using a type that is professional looking. You don't want to use anything that is too cursive or too swirly, too ornate. You don't want your professional letter to look like you're reading a wedding invitation. Right? You want it to look professional with standard fonts. Some of the standard fonts include Calibri. I use Calibri a lot whenever I open up a Word document. It's already loaded to Calibri and it's a good font. Times New Roman. Times New Roman is another font that's standard. Arial is standard. On certain computers, Helvetica is standard. There are a lot of them. You want to avoid, though, the fonts that are really stylized looking, the real stylized looking fonts. So, for example, Chiller, which looks like you're in a horror movie. You don't want to use that font, right? Not for professional communication. Or Comic Sans, and that looks a little too playful. or something that looks really, really thick and heavy in terms of the font size, real boxy, anything like that, you want to avoid it. You want to just use something that's just a straightforward font for your professional documents. You want to be mindful of spacing and margins. Now, what I would recommend you do is I would recommend that you, in your Word documents, set everything to single space. If you open up a blank Microsoft Word document, and depending on the kind of computer you're using, now I don't know if this is true with an Apple computer, but I know with the computer that I use, if you hit Control, the Control key, and then the letter A as an apple, okay? Control A in that blank document and just highlight all. There may not be anything in the document, right, if it's blank, but just hit Control A so that it's saying all of it. I'm highlighting every part of this document. And if you then go to your paragraph setting, and if you change that setting to 1.0, okay, for one, single space font, then you have to go back to it because it may click off once you make a selection. You have to go back to it, and near the end of that drop down box, it would say remove space after paragraph. You want to click that. You want to click remove space after the paragraph. And that's going to take away the extra space that Microsoft Word tends to build in automatically. I don't know why it does that. Okay. And so you want your letters to be single spaced. You want your letters to be single spaced. Now, in the book, and I don't remember exactly where it is, it might be around page 103, between 100 and 103, somewhere in there. It gives you an example and it shows you the spacing. You want to be mindful of the spacing, but you can still set your entire letter to single space. So with a single space setting, your goal is for all of your sections to be single space. Your paragraphs, your sentences, all of those things are single space. Your dateline, everything, single spaced. But you need to manually know when you need to double space so that the look of your letter is acceptable. Everything should not be squished together, line by line. There needs to be some spaces, and you want to make sure that in the chapter on correspondence that you're going to those pages. I think it's on page 101 somewhere to 103, somewhere in that range, and it actually gives you an example and it shows you, okay, I need to space this amount of times or that amount of times in between the date line and the inside address, in between the inside address and the salutation and the body of the letter. And so you want to follow those spacing guidelines because they are standard. Your reader will expect you to know that. But you want to make sure that your entire letter is set to single space. Okay? If that's confusing, please let me know. And I will explain it, try to explain it again, but the book gives you a real good example of that too. Be careful of overcrowding of the text, right? You don't want to put so many words on the page that your reader feels overwhelmed. And be careful of lopsided letters. And those are the letters where all of your writing is so short and brief that you have the majority of your letter page with nothing on it. And so you don't want to start at the top of your letter, the very top, when you have just a little bit of information to communicate. You may want to return a little bit and start closer to the lower or the top portion, but the lower top, I should say, like kind of closer to the middle of the page. And you'll have to look at it. You'll have to look at it to see if it looks right, if the appearance of your letter looks correct, if it looks standard, if it's going to be anything that stops the reader or gives the reader pause. Okay, so again, I'm just highlighting some things from the book, but you want to make sure that you go back to the book and that you do the readings because they will explain these things in more detail. It's important to make a good impression on your reader, of course, right? Credibility is the name of the game. So you want to always be mindful of your style and tone. Your style of writing is the way in which you write, and your tone is your attitude, essentially, behind your words. And so you want readers to see you as courteous, well-informed, and professional. And if your style is not clear, right? Your wording, your language is not clear, or if your tone comes across as harsh or unpleasant, that will not make a good impression on your reader. And there will be times when you're writing in response to someone who may have offended you, And you may be well within your right to be offended by something that happened. But as a professional, you don't want your emotions to take charge. You want to control your tone. You want to be professional. You want to make sure that you have your mannerisms in place. And you want to make sure that you're respectful of your reader. And so that's something that's also discussed when we talk about you attitude. Now, the book does a good job of outlining what you attitude is, so I'm not going to recreate the wheel. But you're essentially putting yourself in the reader's position and you're practicing you attitude. So you attitude is a way in which you connect to your reader, a way in which you relate to your reader, where you're realizing, okay, this is an actual person that's going to read this. I need to be respectful of them and how I communicate. I need to make sure they're my focus. And so it's that mindset, but it's also your wording, because you never want to write something where you're the focus of it. You and your company are the sole focus of it. And so your book talks about the I-centered draft, okay, around page 108, I believe, and it's kind of near the mid-center of the page. It gives you an example of an I-centered draft. And so in that example, most of the writing talks from the standpoint of I or we, right, in terms of the individual and the organization. You want to start to practice putting your words with the reader at the center, right? So instead of saying, you know, I think our product will be your best option, right? You could say, um, hopefully you will find that our product meets your needs or far exceeds your needs, right? And so you're taking the focus off of what you think and putting it on what you want for the reader. You're making the reader the focus of your communication. That will take practice, and we will get to apply it and work out all the bugs. And see where we're good at it and see where we need more work as you actually begin writing your letters. Okay, it's easy to talk about it now, but whenever you start actually writing your letters, which you will be doing very, very, very soon, then you will get to start to practice those things. Okay, and so again, pages 108 to 113 talks more about you attitude, and it gives some good examples of ways you can practice that concept. Okay, it would really help you make a good impression on your reader. And there's some examples also in pages 109 and 110. So hopefully this has been helpful thus far. And as we begin to wrap up, let's talk about the 5 most common types of business letters. So we have inquiry letters, cover letters, special request letters, sales letters, and customer relations letters. We will be writing various types of letters in this class, and they will come from this list. And so one of the key things to remember is that regardless of the type of letter you're writing, there will be opportunities within each of those categories for you to have to send good news correspondence and bad news correspondence. Okay? If you're writing a good news letter, you want to use a direct approach. And the textbook talks about this on page 119. You want to give the reader the good news early in your letter. And so, for example, if it's an admissions letter, let's just say, for example, you work in an admissions office for a college and you are writing a letter to tell a prospective student that he or she has been accepted into the program that he or she applied for. Okay, that's good news. And so you don't want your congratulations to come in the conclusion paragraph of your letter. You want it up in the abstract. You want to say, congratulations, we're pleased to inform you that your application has been accepted for XYZ program at, JKL College, right? You want that information early. In good news correspondence, you want to be direct. However, if it is bad news correspondence and you're having to send a bad news message, or if you're having to tell someone no, that you won't refund their money, whatever the case might be, you do not want to open your letter with the bad news. You want to be indirect in this case. With good news, we want to be direct. We just want to get to the good news as fast as we can. But with the bad news message, we don't want to get to the bad news as fast as we can. We want to be indirect. You want to begin your letter with a professional, generalized opening in that abstract. Okay, you want to sandwich the bad news in the middle of the letter, and you want to end with a goodwill closing. So this is really important because you will be writing a bad news letter in this class. Okay, it's important that you understand that with bad news communication, if we look at ABC format, think of a burger, right? Think of a slider. You have two buns and you have meat in the middle. Okay, and so in that burger, you want to pretend that the bad news is the meat of it. You do not want to start your communication with the bad news. If you have to tell someone that they've not been accepted to the college, right? For example, you don't want to start your abstract paragraph with I regret to inform you that you've not been accepted to the program. You don't want to do that. You want to put the bad news in the middle. And so you can begin with, thank you for your application to JKL College. We are always excited that students want to join our community of learners. Just making it up, okay? And then in that next paragraph, you want to say, we regret to inform you that your application has not been accepted for admission. And there you want to put all the details, okay? And then for your goodwill closing, you want to make sure that you leave the door open, right? The door of communication open, and that you close in a goodwill manner. So you could say something like, again, thank you for your application. We review applications every year, and we hope you will apply for the next cycle in the coming year. You know, something goodwill, something to leave on a more positive note. And so with bad news, you want to sandwich the bad news in the middle. In the middle. Don't begin with it, don't end with it, sandwich it right in the middle of your communication. And there's some good examples of that on pages 120 and page 121. Okay, the book also gives us some really useful guidelines for saying no diplomatically. It's not easy to say no. It's much easier to say yes, to have a happy customer, a happy client, a happy coworker, because you've agreed to what it is they want. But there will be times when you have to say no. Okay, and it can be difficult, but these 5 guidelines can help. And so you can thank kind of what I just said. You can thank the customers to start. You can start there with a thank you. You can state the problem carefully to reassure the customer that you understand the complaint. Sometimes if you just respond, it may not set well with the customer or the client. They may need to know, depending on the situation, that you've understood what it is you're asking them to do or what it is you need. And this is also in verbal communication. If you're on the phone with them, they just may need to hear you restate their concern to them, right? So that they know, okay, you understand what it is they're asking of you. And so it's important when necessary to state the problem carefully to reassure the customer that you understand the complaint. Okay? Explain what happened with the product or service before you give the customer a decision. Okay, so sometimes explanation is necessary. Now keep in mind, with bad news communication where you have to tell someone no, sometimes you're not at fault, but you're being blamed for something. Okay, that's definitely not a good feeling, and that can definitely make us become defensive. And so in those cases, you may not feel like you need to explain anything. I'm not at fault, you're at fault. This is your problem, right? You can't necessarily do that in professional communication. In professional communication, you want to make sure that you do everything you can to keep that customer in a goodwill realm, if we can say it that way. Okay, you want to make sure that you keep the door open for communication as much as is possible on your end. And you want to give your decision without hedging. Okay, you don't need to apologize for your decision. If you have a decision to give and you've thought about it and you've weighed it, and you have to make the best decision for your company, then you just have to say what needs to be said. So give your decision without hedging, without apologizing for it, and make sure that it's stated clearly, okay, and diplomatically. Make sure your style and your tone are working together with you on that, so that it doesn't come across as harsh or judgmental or negative. Okay, and you want to leave the door open for better and continued business. Again, that's the whole goal of the goodwill aspect, right? You don't want your words or your tone or your approach to slam the door shut so that you can't do business with that person anymore, or so that you have a bad relationship with that coworker. Okay, and in the textbook, pages 130 to 133 discusses that in a little bit more detail. And so, again, hopefully, this slide show presentation has been helpful. Again, I'm just highlighting things from the book. Like I said, learning about letters is not necessarily the most exciting thing in the world, but it's so necessary because it will diminish your credibility when you leave off a part of that letter that your reader is expecting you to have. Okay, so you want to make sure that you um, put some attention to this so that you're actually learning the ways to do it right. And if you already know how to write letters and this is just kind of a refresher for you, then that's really good as well. Okay? If you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'm in B119 on campus. My office hours are on the homepage for our D2L class, and I always enjoy meeting my online students. Okay? I hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk with you soon.